The fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent and the subsequent deployment of hundreds more federal agents into Minnesota present a stark question. What psychic forces drive a collective to such a violent clash between citizen and state? I propose this is not merely a political dispute, but a manifestation of a profound, unconscious struggle for individuation, where a society, like an individual, must painfully sacrifice its childish dependencies to assume the duties of its own existence. The immediate facts are clear. A woman is dead, protests have blocked roadways and drawn tear gas, and the state government is suing the federal administration to halt Operation Metro Surge. We can see this as a collective neurosis, where the symbolic content of the conflict, the ICE out demands, the defensive barriers at federal sites, masks a deeper, unfulfilled adaptation to reality. The protesters' defiance and the federal authorities' rigid response mirror the striking manifestations of jealousy, criticism, irritability, and defiance of parental authority seen in the individual's struggle for selfhood. Here, the parental authority is the federal power. The childish inertia is a populace perhaps clinging to an older, simpler conception of its relationship to that power. The lawsuit filed by Minnesota, Minneapolis, and St. Paul is a legalistic form of this defiance, a directed thinking aimed at halting a parental decree. Yet this very struggle, this psychic tension, is the necessary labor of growth. The weekend's clashes and the student walkouts are not lawless chaos, but, in a psychological sense, entirely motivated expressions of a collective psyche in crisis, revealing what slumbers uneasily beneath the ordered world. The danger, however, lies in remaining trapped in this symbolic rebellion. The defense of the operation by DHS Secretary Noem and the promise of more agents suggest an authoritarian parental complex digging in, risking a catastrophic failure to adapt. If the sexual content of dreams is only an apparent incest wish, but actually a symbolic expression of a present-day need, then perhaps the intense focus on immigration enforcement is also a symbol, a regressive container for a more chaotic, unaddressed national anxiety. The stakes are the psychic health of the polity. Will this conflict lead to a new level of conscious responsibility, or merely to a more entrenched and violent pathology? This forces us to ask, what is the unacknowledged reality to which neither side is adapting? We see here a familiar pattern. A single violent act, the fatal shooting of Renee Nicole Good by an ICE agent, triggers a mass reaction, a collective eruption of protest and political conflict. The concrete details, the tear gas at the Whipple Federal Building, the student walkouts at Roosevelt High, the lawsuit filed by the state against the federal operation, are not isolated facts. They are symptoms of a deeper, shared psychic state. This is the psychology of the nation manifesting, just as the psychology of the individual does. What the group does, the individuals within it do also. The immediate, reflexive assignment of total blame, the protesters targeting ICE, the DHS secretary defending the operation and deploying hundreds more agents, shows precisely what I have observed: the tendency to make one's neighbor responsible for one's own bad qualities. Each side projects its shadow onto the other, and the conflict escalates. This projection is a defense against the painful work of self-examination. The lawsuit and the defense of Operation Metro Surge are forms of directed, intellectual thinking aimed at an external enemy. But beneath this ordered political and legal consciousness slumbers the chaotic unconscious of the community, the unprocessed emotions of fear, historical injustice, and tribal loyalty. The student walkouts and the clashes at the memorial are the symbolic, fantastical thinking of the collective breaking through. They are a mass dream playing out in the streets, expressing a wish for a different reality and a deep-seated resistance to a perceived oppressive authority. The danger is that this collective complex, once activated, follows its own deterministic logic, leading not to resolution but to an iron scourge of continued strife, as the governor placing the National Guard on standby grimly foreshadows. The stakes are the avoidance of that scourge. A real transformation cannot come from universal laws or legal victories alone, but only from a remodeling of the attitude of the individual. This means each person, whether agent, protester, or official, must strike against the confines of their own unconscious, to confront what they project onto the other side. It is the most difficult task, a sacrifice of the childish demand for a simple villain and the assumption of the duty of self-knowledge. Yet the news facts show only the outward battle, not this inward one. The limitation is clear. While I argue that individual metamorphosis must come first, the current catastrophic epoch seems to drive the collective ever deeper into its defensive postures. So we must ask, in the face of such entrenched complexes, where does an individual even begin? The immediate, concrete fact of a federal agent killing Renee Nicole Good has triggered a massive psychic regression within the collective. The protests, the school walkouts, the erection of security barriers, these are not random eruptions. They are the visible struggle of a libido that has encountered a seemingly insurmountable obstacle in the present, the reality of state power and a contested immigration operation. The conflict, therefore, is not merely about a past incident, but is produced by a present biologically essential task, the community's demand for safety and justice, which is now blocked. The resulting stored-up energy regresses, manifesting in the symbolic confrontational actions of blocking roadways and clashing with police. This is the fight with the dragon, the treasure-guarding force that halts progression. Governor Walz placing the National Guard on standby and the state's lawsuit against the federal operation represent an attempt at conscious adaptation, a move to reassert a collective persona of lawful order. Yet, simultaneously, the DHS Secretary's deployment of hundreds more ICE agents intensifies the obstacle. This political maneuvering illustrates the tension between the collective persona, the official administrative response, and the raw individual libido expressed in the streets. The danger is a fatal introversion. If the libido, thwarted and unable to achieve its aim in reality, turns entirely inward, it leads to the estrangement for protest and state action, but a stark manifestation of the collective unconscious in turmoil. The fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent was the trigger, the eruption of a chaotic content into the ordered world of civic life. Now, the weekend protests that blocked roads and saw 30 detained, the deployment of tear gas and security barriers, these are not merely political acts, they are the external collective enactment of a psychic split. The state's lawsuit to halt Operation Metro Surge and Secretary Noem's counter-move to deploy hundreds more agents represent the psyche's warring factions, attempting to resolve tension through force, projecting responsibility outward. This is the iron scourge I warned of, where a nation, like an individual, makes its neighbor responsible for its own bad qualities. The parallel is precise. The individual psyche, when it refuses to confront its own shadow, its own potential for violence, its own xenophobic fears, projects that shadow onto an external object. Here, the federal government projects a need for order and control onto a population it perceives as chaotic, while segments of that population project their outrage and sense of violation onto the federal apparatus. Each side sees its own bad qualities in the other. The student walkouts at Roosevelt and Maple Grove high schools are a critical datum. They show the awakening of a new attitude in the younger generation, a refusal to accept the dogmatic authority of the existing order. This is not merely political activism, it is the seed of a moral autonomy I described, a courageous unveiling of a painful truth about power and mortality in their community. Yet, there is a limitation in applying this framework directly. My concepts deal with the slow, internal metamorphosis of the individual attitude as the only true beginning of collective change. The news facts show the rapid external mechanics of power. Governor Walz placing the National Guard on standby is a political calculation, not a psychological analysis. We can interpret the clash of projections, but we cannot predict its resolution through therapy. The stakes are the very reality of the community's being. This is the stuff of its collective self-creation playing out violently in the streets. Whether this energy will be directed consciously or continue to erupt instinctively remains the pressing question. While the shooting of Renee Good appears as the clear causal event, my framework pushes us to see the present conflict as the primary pathogenic site. The immediate political and social reactions are not merely effects, they constitute the neurosis itself, a collective failure to adapt to a present reality now charged with that death. Governor Walz placing the National Guard on standby and the filing of a lawsuit by Minnesota, Minneapolis, and St. Paul are not just responses, they are symptoms of a blocked progression. The state, like an individual facing an insurmountable task, is regressing into a familiar pattern of legal and military posturing because the actual duty, a genuine reckoning with state violence and community trust, is too difficult. This is a classic regression where the libido of public energy is stored up and manifests in these symbolic clashes, like the tear gas and detentions at the Whipple Federal Building. Yet, a tension arises. Can a collective political body truly be analyzed as an individual psyche? The deployment of hundreds more ICE agents announced by Secretary Noem is a concrete escalation, a reinforcement of the very authority the protests oppose. This presents a limit to a purely psychological reading. The power dynamics here are institutional and material, not just symbolic. The student walkouts from Roosevelt and Maple Grove high schools, however, perfectly illustrate the struggle I describe. They are the healthy impulse towards individuation, a defiance of parental authority, in this case governmental authority, in service of a new conscious adaptation. The stakes are the future health of the social body. Will it remain in a neurotic loop of protest and repression or find a progressive path forward? This leads us to a final synthesis. The violent clash between protesters and federal agents in Minneapolis following the shooting of Renee Good presents us with a stark image of the collective unconscious erupting into the ordered world. The state's lawsuit against the federal Operation Metro Surge and the deployment of hundreds more ICE agents are not just policy disputes, they are the conscious ego attempting to enforce a directed, rationalized structure upon a chaotic, symbolic reality that has broken through. I see two explicit parallels here. First, the student walkouts at Roosevelt High and Maple Grove High are a form of fantastic thinking, a symbolic, wish-driven action akin to the dream thinking of the individual. They are not a negotiated policy proposal, they are an image, a mass expression of a moral revulsion against authority, much like the psychological symbols that arise from the unconscious. Second, the physical confrontation, the tear gas, the blocked roadways, the security barriers at the Whipple Federal Building, mirrors the analytic process itself. The causally reductive procedure of the state and federal authorities seeks to disintegrate the protest into mere criminal acts or political maneuvering. In doing so, it fails to synthesize the symbol into a comprehensible expression. The Renee Good incident has become a collective symbol, and the state's legal action is an attempt at analysis, while the protests are the psyche's synthetic and violent attempt to create a new meaning. The stakes are the stability of the collective psyche itself. If the authorities see only lawbreaking and the protesters see only oppression, both remain trapped in a negative transference, projecting their own shadow
to the other. The danger is a perpetual barbarianism, where, as in war, each makes their neighbor responsible for his own bad qualities. The limitation, of course, is the energy of unconscious is not inherently wise. The crab in the ford can seize the foot and halt all progress. The deployment of the National Guard by Government Walz is precisely this kind of regression, forceful reaction to a psychic truth that demands integration, not suppression. This leaves us with the critical question: can a society perform a synthetic treatment of its own traumatic symbols, or is it doomed to reenact them? Please like and subscribe.